Hello, everyone. So we're going to start by looking over Module 1, which is about how did we get here, an introduction to psychological ethics. So the American Psychological Association Ethical Principles of Psychologists and Code of Conduct is often just shortened to be the Ethics Code. And it was first sort of conceptualized, understood as important in 1947. So that's when the first APA Committee on the Ethical Standards for Psychologists was started. And it took them a while to do their work. And there was some leadership changes, things along those lines. And so the first ethics code was adopted by APA in 1952, and it was first published in 1953. There have been 8 full code revisions over the years. The most recent full code was published in 2002, but there have been, with an effective date of June 1st, 2003, but there have been amendments in 2010 and 2016, unfortunately, largely to address a gigantic ethical issue in the field, which is that there were psychologists, including the head of the APA ethics office, who were involved in torture, what they called enhanced interrogation, during the time of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. As you can imagine, when this came to light, the membership of the APA was aghast and really fought back against this. A lot of people left APA at that point in time because how are you going to tell us how to act ethically if this is what you're doing, right? So those amendments went in to essentially try to make sure that never happens again. There is a full code revision that's been in progress since 2017, so it's actually taken longer than the first code. And granted, COVID was in the middle there. The last sort of big step there was in 2025, which is a year before when I'm prepping this class for the first time. There was a 90-day comment period where they asked psychologists to give feedback on the code itself. And your Nap et al. Blackboard reading will be related to that. So it'll hear us talk about why it's important to have psychologists comment on the code. But now, as of again, summer 2026, when I'm making these videos, we don't know. We don't know where the revision is. We don't know if I'm going to have to redo the slides for this course the next time I teach it. We don't know. So here is what is changing and what's not. So looking at the structure right now, there's an introduction, a preamble, 5 principles, A through E, and then 10 sections of ethical standards. In the 2025 draft code, the number of principles has been expanded to 8. And then there's a section on the relationship between the principles and the standards that's been added, and there are still 10 sections of standards. So the new principles include new focus areas like environmental stewardship and social justice. There is now in this proposed code that hasn't been adopted yet, a new section addressing the ethical use of technology, including AI and telehealth. And then the environmental focus, not included in any previous version of the ethics code, is included under the new principle of environmental stewardship. So some potential big changes coming up. Not sure when they'll officially come out. So how do we apply the APA ethics code? And that's really the core of what this class is going to be about. Sure, we're going to go over the nuances of the code itself, but we're thinking about how is it applied? Why is it applied? Things along those lines. So technically the code applies only to APA members and student affiliates. That being said, it really has become the gold standard for practice and research in psychology in general, whether or not you're a member of the APA. And it covers any activity, any people, any communication that can happen in the role of a psychologist. And that includes industrial organizational psychologists, HR folks, folks working in workplace settings. So the Watts et al. Blackboard reading for this module will cover some of this. But it only largely includes activities that are part of your working role as a psychologist. There's some exceptions to just like be a good person, don't commit crimes, right? Things along. And it sounds so silly to say that, but again, the head of the APA ethics office was involved in torture, right? So it's not silly to say that. And there's this idea of the word reasonable, and I liked this quote that it was the prevailing professional judgment of psychologists engaged in similar activities in similar circumstances, given the knowledge the psychologist had or should have had at the time. So it doesn't matter if you didn't have the knowledge, if you should have had it, like if you should have paid attention in your grad school classes, it applies. It's enforced by the APA Ethics Committee. Ethics complaints can be reported either by APA members or by non-members with a statute of limitations. I don't call it that, but basically a statute of limitations of 3 years. So it has to be reported within 3 years of the incident happening. The sanctions they can give are a little, there's not much they can do. They're not a legal body, right? And so they can give you a reprimand, a censure, they can expel you from the APA, or they can have a stipulated resignation. So basically it says you have to resign and kind of say why you're resigning. Some of the standards are linked to existing laws, but not all of the ethical standards are related to legal issues. They're sort of things we do over and above the law. Some of the laws that we run into as working psychologists that are really important, I've put up here. So FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and it is any student education record. So yourselves as grad students, this applies to you. So it gives parents or students more control of their educational records, and it prohibits any educational institution, and I believe it's any educational institution who receives any kind of federal funding. So even if your students get like grants, that counts. From disclosing personally identifiable information without consent of the student, or if they're too young, their parent. So it's any public or private school, elementary, secondary, post-secondary, any state or local education agency as well. And so this is any part of your educational record. You can disclose to certain people, right? So school officials can know, like the registrar's office can know your grades because they need that to be able to tell whether or not you can graduate, and also to post it to your transcript, right? Things like that. If you're transferring and you request your transcript, that's fine. Other things along the lines, financial aid, if you have a scholarship, a grant, accrediting organization, health and safety emergencies. If we need to send an ambulance, heaven forbid, to someone's dorm room, right, we can disclose where they are. If there's a judicial order, that's something we'll talk about throughout the semester, is what happens if a judicial order comes and it feels like it's in violation of your ethics code. Things like that. And then there's HIPAA, which everyone gets wrong on the internet, spelled with 2 P's, but it's actually with 2 A's. So it's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And this is about patient health information in any sort of healthcare setting, including psychotherapy. And this is to ensure that individuals' health information is protected, but also it's what allows you to use things like MyChart or patient portals so you can access your own information. Any healthcare provider who's sending any kind of electronic information, which in this day and age is pretty much any healthcare provider, is covered by HIPAA. If you work for a health plan or a healthcare clearinghouse, or let's say you do claims processing, data analysis, billing, things along those lines, you are covered. You have to comply with HIPAA. And so protected health information is anything that's individually identifiable. And so you can disclose it to the own individual. This just makes me think of when I was in grad school, I was moving for my internship and I wanted my medical records, and they were going to charge me, I forget, it was astronomical, like 50 cents a page, maybe $1 a page to make a photocopy of it. Now I just be able to pull it up online, right? And then share that with my new provider. Um, Treatment payment and healthcare operations. Uh, you can de-identify a data set for purposes of research or public health interests. So, for example, if you have a case of Ebola, not only can they, but they have to report it to the state health organization, right? So that's just a little warm up for what we're going to be dealing with all semester. And these are just two of the laws that we will be thinking about, talking about, but we'll mostly be talking more about, like, again, the ethics that go above and beyond what we are required to do, but what we do, again, to like try to be good ethical professionals.